Hey, I am so glad that you're here, but I am equally so incredibly excited to break down the conversation between Alex Hormozi and Tony Robbins and give you my 2 cents, give you my finding from a mental performance, leadership, and identity based perspective. Because the conversation that took place between Alex Hormozi and Tony Robbins is a conversation that I have on a weekly, if not daily basis with so many high performers, and how Alex was feeling and what he was experiencing is exactly the same thing that a lot of the people that I speak to on a daily basis feel when they initially start working with HHP. And I think when I initially saw that the two of them had done a podcast together, it sparked my interest because I was curious to see what would come out of it. And while I didn't expect what come out of it to come out of it, I genuinely do believe that this conversation is an industry disrupting conversation. It's an industry disrupting conversation because if everything that we know about Alex Hormozi, the perception can sometimes fall into two camps. You either think he is the absolute goat and he's I've heard him mentioned as the Lord and Savior before, like, of the hustle culture. And then you have people who don't resonate with him at all, and I would have fallen into that camp. I was very much a Hormozy fan, and then when I started to kind of do my own work and release myself from my own beliefs, I had to step away from ever really following him because it just was so misaligned. He is incredible at business, right? He's incredible at what he does, but it was his personal stuff and how he spoke about like suffering and you need to build an undeniable stack of proof to it that you are who you say you are, and all of the kind of personal narrative beliefs that he shared, while not wrong, right, were true for him, were just what I couldn't align with. And I think that's okay and I think that's healthy, right? But what we're seeing here right now is somebody who is courageous and brave because they're willing to sit in front of the world and admit this no longer works for me. I'm not fulfilled. I never have been fulfilled. And to have a conversation like that, because I think everybody who watched it can probably safely say that it felt a little bit more like a coaching session than it did a podcast between two people. And I think there's a massive amount of vulnerability that comes with being willing to sit and showcase a coaching session where it directly questions and talks about your identity and what you have created so far. And I think the respect that I have for Alex Hormozi right now, and they're the words I never thought I'd say out loud, but the respect I have for him is genuinely huge, because to do that, I know that there's going to be a massive amount of change to come from it, because I'm already seeing it. I'm already seeing people speak about it. I'm already seeing maybe the internal conflict that they're feeling because he has started to speak differently, right? And I think it's going to create a lot of change for people too. As much as he's going through the change, I think, and I hope that he'll bring people with him. I'm curious to know what he does with that conversation. I'm curious to see how it all plays out. And I genuinely hope that he has taken something from it where he now sees that he can and has the opportunity, so long as he gives himself permission, to operate a different way. But today, for the sake of this video, what I want to do is I want to break down where Alex Hormozi currently is at, right? And effectively, if I were to coach him, what would I do? Because I think a lot of people, whether they'll admit it or not or realize it or not, will have resonated with his story, will have resonated with the current space that he's in, right? And I want to talk down through it. And if you see me looking down, I'm just looking at my notes here because I made a lot of notes on this. And I think I watched the whole thing about like 2, if not 3 times. And every single time I took more notes. And I've just synopsisized them into what's here in front of me. So if we look at his current set point, right? His current lived experience right now is he is a billionaire. He has all the money he could ever want for. He has all the success on paper. But ultimately, he can't feel it. He has all the success in the world and still feels unfulfilled. He has all the success in the world but still feels lost and unfulfilled and, in his own words, apathetic. So he feels like, what's the point? Like, what's this all for? He's starting to kind of have this, like, energy that is very much like a fuck this shit type thing, right? And that's not because he doesn't care. It's because he's at the threshold of his success without any fulfillment attached to it. And I think a lot of people find themselves in that space at different points. Now, up until this point, Alex Hormozi was often reflected back to me in conversations when I was having conversations with clients, because they would say to me, yeah, but what about Alex Hormozi? Like, if he could do it, so can I. And I'm like, agreed, but you also have to look at the context of Alex's life. Like, he's willing to sacrifice friends, family, life and living and freedom in the way that you might like it, for the pursuit of one specific goal. And while that is completely and utterly admirable, is that the life that you want? Like, to shut off the world, to not have any enjoyment outside of currently what you're doing for the sake of suffering towards a goal, is that what you want? And a lot of people had big resistance to that in the early days of kind of when we were kind of speaking about it, because the resistance was they believed that they needed to suffer and grind and have this relentlessness in terms of drive and the amount of hours that you work, because if you weren't sacrificing enough, then you weren't successful enough. And I think that's a lot of what the narrative of Hormozi can be taken up at. It might not have been what he meant, but how people hear it can be two very different things. And certainly for a lot of conversations I would have had over the years, that was how a lot of people took it up. It's like, I need to bleed to succeed, and if I'm not bleeding enough, then I'm not successful enough, and therefore I just need to do more, try harder, and shut out more of my life in order to obtain what I want. And what we realize is everybody will have a different threshold for that. They'll get to a limit where they're like, enough is enough. I had to experience burnout about 4 times, twice really chronically, and have my body basically turn against me for me to actually fucking wake up and listen. Other people, I find, will have children, and then all of a sudden the way that they worked and the way that they operated is no longer the thing that they know that they can sustain, because now they have a tiny human that they are responsible for and they love and they want to be more present for. So everybody will have different circumstances, different experiences, and different events and thresholds that will bring them to that threshold. But what we're finding here, right, is concrete evidence, first and foremost, that there is always a threshold. That there is always a point where people will get to a point where they say, enough is enough. Even though I have all of the things that I could ever want, enough is enough to feel this way, right? So everybody will have a different threshold. And that's something that I wanted to start with, because a lot of the work that I do with people, they often question themselves or question their emotions or question the fact that they're feeling their emotions. Like, why do I feel so differently? Why do people like Hormozi seem to be able to shut off the world and get more shit done? And why do people who, get the success, and then here I am still trying to maybe, I suppose, experience and feel things? And always the answer I give is, like, you're way ahead of the curve. Because you're feeling something, you're still alive to the fact that what's happening right now just isn't what you want fully. In the way that you're operating, your emotions are telling you that it needs to be different. And I'll always say that to my clients, because the fact that you're feeling is the fact that you're alive. The fact that you can feel is the fact that it's going to set you apart. And you're early, right? Imagine getting to a point where you have billions in the bank, and then getting to a point that you feel so lost and so trapped that, like, you just have no meaning in your life. I'd rather build the meaning while I build my life, and know that as I'm building, I'm also enjoying my life. And that can be really hard to communicate to people sometimes. So if we look at the origin story, right, and I've looked at where he currently is at, feeling lost, trapped, unfulfilled, apathetic, but he is clearly ready for something different. He just doesn't know what that different is yet, right? Because there's this internal friction that happens, because as much as he knows he has enough of what he's currently feeling and he doesn't want this to be part of his forever, he also doesn't know how to create that without impacting what he has built. And I think that's a lot of the internal resistance that a lot of people will face as well, of like, if what has built me has built to where I am right now, if I'm to do anything different, there is a potential that all of that might fall away and will go to shit. I hear that statement all the time. If I slow down, if I change directions, then I might lose everything. And I think that's maybe something that he didn't get to express, but might be also feeling, again, I'm only assuming based on conversations I have all the time with different high performers. Well, that's a general theme that comes up of, like, I'm so terrified of losing what I've built to even attempt to do anything else, to even attempt to try a different way. So that's the first thing, right? That's the current scenario of where he's currently at. And you could visibly see his discomfort. You could see him gripping, embracing the chair. You could see his, every time Tony Robbins said something that kind of maybe struck a chord with his identity, he shifted a little bit in his seat, and all that is body language to say that like something is hitting and something is landing. But if we go into what he spoke around I would call his origin story, the part of him that kind of put the mask up, created a persona to protect himself, and essentially that persona built what he has built so far, is the origin story where what he told around being, I think it was 20 years of age, he said, I was trying to find meaning and fulfillment, and I was trying to find happiness. And again, what does that signify? Someone who was lost, someone who was unfulfilled, someone who wasn't happy within themselves, right? So very similar to the state he's feeling now, lost, apathetic, unfulfilled. But at 20, he'd been reading all the books, he'd been doing all the things, he'd been trying to make all the change, but nothing was changing for him, right? And he used these words: I felt rejected by happiness because happiness was something that I felt was unattainable. And when happiness became unattainable, and the deeper one, when I felt rejected by happiness, here's where he said, I put the mask up. He didn't say those words, but he then said, fuck happiness. And that's where that belief got created, because that belief became the persona. It became what he said, like, fuck happiness, I don't need happiness. And then he said, so I decided to become useful instead. So this is what started his survival-based, like, success and performance, because it was built out of, I'm going to be useful. So that's where the duty got created. So it gave him his early drive, right? Yes, there was an element where he wanted to help people and be useful. We're never going to deny that, right? Because you could see he is, and I've always seen that in him, he's a man with a huge heart, right? And you can see there's a softness to him, and there's a vulnerability to him, and there's depth to him that is his superpower that he hadn't tapped into yet. But when you look at that, he kind of shut all that away and put the fuck happiness kind of mask up, because he felt that he could never really reach it, and therefore felt rejected by it. But then went into, I'm going to be useful. So in order to kind of find a way to suppress those feelings, he started doing. So started working, started being dutiful to other people. And what was happening at that moment, whether he realizes it or not, but I want to highlight it to you, right? Because you might be in a similar situation to him, where work started fulfilling a need. So I believe what started was work started to give him recognition. And he spoke about this just in little parts, where he said, at one point, as he was a fitness coach, he said, you know, the magic was there early on, and then all of a sudden the magic was gone. He said, and that was the same time people started telling me that I was changing their lives and I was impacting them in a great way. And he said, I had all of this feedback and all of this information from so many people, but then the magic was gone. Those words really struck a chord with me, because what I realized is what he didn't say at that point is, if he was to accept the feedback, accept the incredible things that people were saying about how he incredibly impacted them and changed their lives, he believed unconsciously that his driver would disappear. Because if his drive was being fueled by duty, and his needs were being met by that drive, the need of recognition, what is happening is, if he was to accept that, he would have to believe and recognize himself. If he recognized himself, oh my God, I don't need to be operating in this way, will I still have my drive? And that's where a lot of people will say stuck, right? Because we don't realize that there's a need that's being met behind the way that we're operating, right? I see it a lot of times in a different way of, like, a lot of high performers will say to me that, oh, like, pressure is what drives high performance, and pressure is something that I love, and you know, pressure is what makes me the success that I am. And I was like, well, tell me about that. Tell me how that manifests. And they're like, oh, well, I'll always be like razor sharp focus, and I'll always get shit done, but it'll always be at the last minute. I'm like, okay. So you wait till the last minute, so you'll hesitate, delay, put things off, procrastinate. And they're like, yeah, it's a real sticking point of mine, so that the pressure is big enough for you to act. So you trust the pressure to help you focus. You trust the pressure to get you to act. But what I'm hearing is you don't trust yourself to act when you don't have that pressure. And whenever I say those words, they're like, oh, fuck. Because what they see is they need pressure to get going. And if they are to trust themselves. Ultimately, the need for pressure disappears, but the worry and the concern is, if the need disappears, does my drive disappear as well? So no, it isn't going to happen, right, is the first thing. But I'll tell you what to do afterwards that wasn't really in the video, that is going to be really helpful for you. But just to kind of talk still about the journey, right? So again, the magic was gone despite so many people saying how much they impacted it, because he couldn't believe it. Because if he believed it, it would mean that he potentially, in his mind, would lose his drive, and that need would be gone, right? And the second thing that he said that I thought was very interesting was around the fact where he said, well, currently right now, what has built me is, the duty and the obligation. So his duty turned very quickly into obligation, right? So what initially drove him started to become something that, he may have potentially resented because of the obligation. Like, I have to now. This is something that I have to continue to do. And that's where that trapped feeling will always come into play. But he said he never really questioned it because he never felt anxious. Just think about that for a second. He never questioned his drive. He never questioned how he was operating. He never questioned the why behind what he was doing, because he never felt anxious. So if he didn't feel anxious, there wasn't something wrong with it, right? But then he opened up and said, but I have developed this apathy now, right? And here's the word he says: I do this because it's all I'm good at and it's all I've ever known. I do this because it's all I'm good at and it's all I've ever known. And to break that down and to give you perspective on that, what he's actually saying but not saying is, I do this because I'm good at it and it feels safe and familiar and it's all I've ever known, so I'm certain of it and it's comfortable to me. I'm safe here. So comfort and safety and what's known is going to provide that sense of safety, right? And that's what's really going to help in when we're building through the lens of survival. So again, it was creating the sense of like, I feel safe when I'm doing this one particular thing and I can control it and I know it. And what that will breathe is this lack of trust within yourself. Like, it'll start to erode your own trust because, again, it's always looking to something external to fulfill something internal for yourself. So what we're seeing here, right, is currently Alex Hormozi is at the point in his life where he has repeated the same pattern. And now he's at the point where he's starting to say, enough is enough. This pattern is no longer serving me. He might become more aware of that pattern. So just to give you an idea of what that pattern looks like, very similar. He'd been chasing something outside of himself, right? To find meaning, to find happiness, to find recognition. And that's an early pattern that got created at the age of 20. That is now exactly where he's at right now. So he's in the exact same position internally, right? So his relationship with himself, so internally, than he was when he was 20. So he has just repeated that same pattern for the last, what is he now, 37? For the last 17 years. And now he's still at the same point where, despite the success, he still doesn't have the internal sense of who he is, right? And the pattern to get there has just remained the same. So he's not just at a new set point, he's at the same set point, despite the success. So like, you think about that just for a second, is a lot of the work that, if I was to summarize what HHP does, is a lot of the people who come to work with me, they get results. They're already winning. They just can't feel it. And they're very in a much similar process of, but then they try and do more and achieve more and try and solve an internal challenge and an internal, I suppose, problem with something external to themselves. So I'll do more at work, I'll achieve more, and I'll, try X, Y, and Z, instead of actually just taking some time to look inward. And I think that is probably, if he had done that, so if you go back to what he did at 20, I read all the books, I listened to all the podcasts, instead of actually, I went to therapy. He may or may not have, he just didn't disclose it. Instead of saying I went to therapy, or I really got to know myself a little bit more and I got to know my past and understand it, so that I now had an understanding of, the stuff that I could leave behind that wasn't mine, and then I had an understanding of the stuff that was mine and then I could take ownership of to change. And that would have helped him in those early days really create this foundation of self, right? Whereas now we see him even 17 years later, I'm assuming he's 37, I don't know where I heard that, I think he is, still at that point where that 20-year-old boy is still searching for that same meaning and that same happiness, but just had built up this persona of, I don't fucking need it, I don't want it, fuck happiness. And in reality, he's now at a point where he does want it. Not necessarily that he needs it, he wants it. He wants to live a more fulfilling life, right? So what's actually happening now is he's at the threshold point to switching up how he operates. So what we're not going to do here, right? And I think Tony Robbins touched it a little bit, but I just want to give a little bit more context to it, where he spoke about the different personas. So he spoke about like analytical Alex and anabolic Alex. And I think that's a really like powerful way of doing it, because it gives an objective trifecta, right? It's like present me, and then there's like the other versions of me. Part of where I disagree with that is there was almost like a piece that was missing in that conversation that would have been vital for people to help with, right? Is that if you look at what built analytical Alex, right, in terms of strengths, because currently right now, Alex has a belief that suffering built him, right? That he found something worth suffering for, and that was the thing that drove him, and then all of a sudden he is at the success he is now because of that, right? And that was the duty part. But if you look at the strengths within that, he had tenacity, he had discipline, he had willpower, he has, trust and confidence in himself, if we were to just recognize it for a second, right? He has probably intuition, like he was able to spot things that maybe other people couldn't spot and then take the opportunity. So he had that tenacity and that drive. So they're all strengths, right? That are part of who he is, that right now he's just harnessing in the way where he's running away from something. If he can harness it in a way where he's like, here's where I'm going to take those strengths, that tenacity, that discipline, that focus, that willpower, and now apply it to learning about myself, learning how to live my life, learning how to allow my success and my life to coexist, where I now start to put the same amount of effort and tenacity and willpower and courage and all those things into fucking learning more about myself. Now what we have is that you're still learning more about who you are, rather than separating these different personas, right? And this is the important piece that I think Tony Robbins might have missed, that will help so many people. Like, sit down. For me, when I sat down to I built my success initially, like built over 6-figure business, proving myself. And when I look at the reality of that, the proving piece was very much like, I couldn't switch off. I felt so trapped. I felt so overwhelmed all the time, but I believe that was the price of success, and therefore I needed more of it. And the more overwhelmed and the more suffering that I had, the more success I actually felt. But really, when I look at it, I was just trying to fulfill a need. I was just trying to belong in the world. I was just trying to find my place. I was just trying to find myself and know myself. Because for a very long time I had lost myself. And the journey back to learning more about myself allowed me then to create a business that allowed me to be part of that success as well. And what I did in those initial days, and what I would urge you to do, is, if you've agreed and kind of resonated with a lot of what Hormozi was saying about suffering and the beliefs that he had, is take the thing that you feel like has built you, whether that's proving or pressure or duty, and just write down a list, and don't fucking stop until your hand is sore and you feel like you can't even think of any more strengths. The strengths behind that, and really sit with it, and now say, okay, well, for my new operating system, what do I want the fuel, the intention to be? So what's happening right now for Alex, in my opinion, if I was to coach him, it's not changing how he operates, it's changing the fuel behind how he operates. So for example, instead of saying, right, you need to let go of that, because a lot of people think that they have to, it's about, how do we take that version of Alex, assess the strengths, so you can now rely on the strengths rather than the persona, the strengths rather than the duty, for example, and now apply it to a new intention. So if we were to give it new fuel, so the intention is the fuel. So it's like, instead of saying I need, now we're going to use it in a way that allows you to build a deeper relationship with yourself, get to know yourself a little bit more. So if you can apply these same strengths to that, you will absolutely become unstoppable. Because now every friction point that you have in business, every bottleneck you have in business, every time that you feel like you have success but you can't feel it or see the meaning, all of that starts to become even greater for the opposite, right? So you'll start to feel your success, you'll start to understand yourself more, you'll start to be clearer in what you want to do, you'll have awareness of what you no longer want to do, and then there you'll have the changes that you need to make within your environment or within how you operate a little bit more, or the structure that you need. But it has to start with knowing yourself first, right? So that's the first thing I would do, is just helping him understand the strengths behind it, so that we can start to set up a new fuel behind how he operates, right? Not take away how he operates, change the fuel. So instead of it being like need, now it's like I want, right? I want this for my life. The next thing I would ask him to do, that I feel like was a missing piece in what Tony had asked him to do, was ask him to get to know his values, right? So why do I say that? Values seem like a bit of fucking woo nonsense fluff, but values are who you are. Values are your guiding principles, whether you realize it or not. So they're your individual fingerprint. They're what's been created from your story, from your experiences, and they're also what help you then build to the next level of your life, right? So we have core values and we have aspirational values. And when you look at that, the way I see that is, your values are your needs, but your values are also your identity. So if you're finding yourself lost and you don't really know what the next steps are, and but you also know you're ready for something different, that's where values come into play. Because when you know who you are, when you know your values, they become, well, am I meeting these values? i.e., am I meeting these needs? Am I meeting these needs? And therefore, the more I meet my needs, the more I feel like myself, because my values are me and my values are my identity. So the more I meet those needs for me instead of other people, what's happening now is I am fulfilling my internal cup for myself, by myself, right? And don't get that misconstrued with, I don't need anybody else to help me. It's like, I'm just starting to actually give to myself as much as I give to others, right? So if you've been driven by duty, a lot of what you value and a lot of what you, a lot of who you are is going to be given away to other people. And that's great and that's admirable and it works and it's great to be that type of person. And we're not trying to shut that person off. We're just also trying to help you be that person for yourself. So that when you do these things for other people, you can find the meaning in it and you do get excited about it. And I'll give an example to that. Years ago, when I was in my most chronic people-pleasing kind of era, right, I would do everything for everybody else, to a point where if someone asked me where I got a particular thing, I would just go and buy the thing instead of actually giving them the fucking website, right? So I'd be like, here you go. And I remember coming to a point where I realized that I just wasn't doing that for myself. I was learning about my values. I was learning about where I was honoring my values for everybody else and just completely ignoring them for myself. And the process of that then is, when I went to do something for anybody, I asked myself this one question. If they didn't give me any recognition, if they didn't say thank you, if they didn't, like, you know, if I didn't get connection off the back of it, am I okay with that? And if the answer was no, I wouldn't do it. Because what was happening, but I didn't realize it, that a majority of the time in that time, I kept doing things for other people to try and earn or get back connection. And when I got it, my God, it felt like ecstatic. It was incredible. But more often than not, when I didn't get it, or at least get what I expected, fucking hell, it broke me. And it built up this resentment, and it built up this like, fuck this, and then I had the apathy. And I realized that I was looking for something in somebody else that I wasn't giving to myself. So the journey back home is that when I got to know my values, it gave me a roadmap back to myself and to meet my needs, because from an integrity standpoint, I wasn't doing that for myself. And therefore, how could I ever expect anybody else to do it for me? I couldn't, right? So that's kind of where I see that like would be a really cool roadmap for Alex to get to know, right? Because what I see, and what I completely disagree with what Tony Robbins did, is Tony Robbins. So if this makes no sense, sorry, I had to pause this video and come back because I had to go on a call. I didn't expect to be doing a 30-minute video. But Tony Robbins, in my opinion, gave him the same solution to what he'd already been doing, right? So I agree that yes, purpose is really important in your life, and creating something bigger than yourself creates that vision. But the part of the conversation that I felt short to really supporting Alex to make like change that is genuinely going to be for him, right? If you think he spent most of his life in duty and of service to other people. And now Tony has just given him the same thing, just reframed in a different way. So I remember, like, at the end of both times I watched it, I was like, oh, like, what has happened? Like, why? No. So the way I see this is, he gave him the solution that he had already been trying, right? More duty, more levels. And I think Alex even said it himself in the episode where he said, oh, it's like another game. You've just given me another game to play. What I would love to have done differently is, yes, the values, but finding out, like, helping him, taking him on a journey of discovering his purpose for life and living, and what, like, living his life actually could look like for him, right? So at the moment, his whole entire success has been built through service to others, duty to others, other people that never really give him an opportunity to ever consult himself and what he actually wanted beyond his work. Like, if you go back to what he said in the early part of it, is like, don't know how to enjoy my life outside of work. I believe the next step of that process isn't to go and find more meaning to give to other people. It's to help him on the journey of giving himself what he never got, and also giving himself what he never gave himself permission to really look after, which is, what do I want my work to give back to me? What purpose do I want my work to serve for me? Not what does fulfillment look like. What would allow me to feel my success? Like, how would I know that I could do that? So what we look at there is helping him, give himself permission to make him a priority in the journey and in the pursuit of giving to other people, right? And that will then allow him to see that there can be more outside of work. There can be more living, there can be more enjoyment, there can be more adventure, there can be more excitement outside of work, which will only then reinforce a new meaning for his work. So I'll give that in context for here, is that there were loads of times in my journey where, when I was building my business, I was building for others, and it was probably to prove myself to a certain degree, right? And the pursuit became about the work, what I could give, what I could provide, i.e. what I could prove, and then hopefully what I could feel, but I never got to the point of feeling it. But it became the pursuit of metrics, right? And the hustle and the doing, and that became my focus, that my life outside of work became non-existent. I wasn't seeing friends, I wasn't enjoying my life, and every single time I faced burnout, my road back to myself was through my values, but also through exploration. And it was exploration of myself, but also exploration of, what is joy to me? Like, what is something that I could do today that would, like, just spark a little bit of a different feeling, or a feeling in myself right now? And I always get called to the mountains. I always get called to, like, an element of adventure or something outdoors. And the more that I started to do that for myself, the more I wanted more of it. So then I got to ask myself the question of, okay, where is my work in friction and in conflict with what I want more of for my life? And how do I help my work enhance my life a little bit more? And they're the questions that you get to ask, that weren't asked of Alex. And I don't know, it was for the sake of the podcast or time or whatever, but I felt like that was a missing piece, that if I was to sit down across from Alex Hormozi and he was to be as open and as honest and as just vulnerable as he was on that chair, it's like, instead of giving him another tangible for his business, can I give him some tangibles for himself? Where he could start considering himself more, where he could start allowing him to think a little bit more and consider his life a little bit more, and the adventure that he wanted to have, or what living would actually look like to him, so that he could start to generate feeling again, right? And then what happens is, you get a taste of the feeling. You start to learn that I want more of this. Like, I want more time with my kids. I want more time going up the mountains. I want more time for adventure. So then I get to ask myself the question of, where's the conflict right now? And then that gives me more solutions that I can change and tweak and harness, that I don't have to completely let go of. I'm just making refinements so that I can make room for. And that gives me an extra layer of, like, okay, if I want more room in my business for this, it means that I can't coach a lot of clients, but the clients I do coach, I have to structure the pricing in a way that allows me to coach less humans, have more impact, but that impact also allows me to have impact in my life. So I have more time to do the things I want to do. So I get to grow in a way that feels aligned. I get to grow in a way that also gives something back to me, right? So now I have harmony between my work and my life, and I know exactly what my work serves for my life rather than just serving for my work. So for me, and if you're in that position too where you want to start doing it, it starts with permission to insert yourself as a priority in your life as well. And then from there is when you start to do that, the next most important thing, right, is to then say, when I start to allow myself to, like, I had a client, I still have that client, but I had a client before who was so driven by work that didn't really have anything outside of work. And now they go back golfing and they're taking up lessons and they're enjoying a bit more. They actually get a lot more work done now, right? They have their boundaries in place. So technically they work less, but their quality of work, their commitment to it, their drive behind it, i.e. the fuel, is way different now, because it's like, oh, I'm going to go in, I'm going to be super focused, I'm going to get all of this done. And then I have a lot more room for play and I have a lot more room for life, because I'm creating it, and I'm allowing it in. And then the next step of that was to say, when I do this, so when I play golf, or when I explore, or when I give this time to myself, what impact and benefit has it for how I show up for my business? Because what's happening is you're actively informing the new operating system. So instead of hustle, grind, do, shut out everything else, it's like, when I make room for life and I start living life more, I feel different, I have more energy. That more energy translates into having more clarity for my business. And now I'm saying, the more I do of this, the more I get to do of this. So now the belief systems gets changed because I'm actively informing it too. So that's the process that I would take Alex on if I was to coach him. And honestly, it's the process that I take a lot of my clients on as well. And I think for me, the reason why I go back to why I love this conversation is because everybody has a threshold. It's not a will I ever hit it, it's a when will I hit it. You get to be ahead of the curve, right? If one of the things I shared to all the Mavericks was, you're ahead of the curve because you got to a point earlier in your career, sooner in your career. You get to build differently. You don't get to a point where you're having $1 billion in your fucking bank and you don't have the feeling behind it. You're actively, because you chose to feel it, you're ahead of the curve. And then you get to build in a way that honors you as well. And I think what has been missing from Alex's journey is himself, considering the human, considering the operator behind it. And I think that is the journey that he can go on now, is bringing the human back to it, bringing himself back into the priority of what he's building, right? So maybe if he was to take duty and to give duty back to himself, to how he's honored everybody else, to now start doing that for himself. And the road that takes you on is building up so much trust within yourself that decisions get clearer. You act differently. So now you act from a place of alignment, and you act from a place of enjoyment and excitement and less pressure and more just like, let's fucking go. And that energy is magnetic, and it's not laden in like obligation or pressure. It's like, fucking hell, this is what's possible, and like I feel unstoppable to achieve it. So that's my 2 cents. I would love to know what comes out of this for you. Whether that's questions, takeaways, just drop them in the comments below. I think genuinely this conversation is going to completely change the game for the industry. And I think if and when Alex starts to maybe think differently and express differently, and we start to see a different way of operating from someone who has operated in one way for so long, it gives people the permission to do the same. And that's why I think that this conversation and Alex's vulnerability, strength and bravery to have this open, on-show conversation in front of the world, it changes the game. And I respect him so much for that, because he's telling people that you get to change your mind. And so long as you can give yourself permission to know that you can make changes without reducing this stuff, and when you make changes to include yourself, it can only enhance what you've already built. So yeah, I'd love to know your 2 cents. I know this is a longer video than I anticipated, but actually it's important because it really allows the work that I do on a regular basis to be, this is the case study, like this is it. And like, you know, I don't know if Alex will ever see this. I probably assume that he won't, but thank you. Statements I never thought I'd say. Thank you, Alex Hormozi, for changing the game, for allowing people to know that there's a new game that gets to be played, and that's the game of life.